Welcome to the MF, that is the masculine feminine quadrant, where we'll be breaking down distinctions and exploring the four corners of the two dual forces of masculine and feminine creation. Join us for some deeply reflective and penetrating conversation and an exchange of energies to open your body, your mind, and your being.
The outtakes of this. Welcome. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the motherfucking quadrant. Now, today we got a beautiful episode for you today, and it's called reacting, responding, and relating to the other self. So this is really just a tie-up of how we finished off last week with this concept of balancing all of them, and if we actually do have a choice and what that choice is. We all want to shift out of this reactive state and become more responsive, but there's also that point of, how do I respond? When do I respond? Do I even respond? I mean, I know, like, for most guys, we're kind of just always in that position, like, what? Like, I want to respond, but there's this way of saying, okay, you know, how we just kind of spelled out and showed this, all these different facets, and even in that concept of responding, you know, maybe I'm not reacting, maybe I dissolved all of these things, and I see this flow of, you know, all the arcana, and I see this flow of the life, and then I see all my lenses, and I'm like, okay, I'm not reacting at all to anything. You know, the object is not to do nothing, but we want to kind of come around to this concept of us having this intuitive, let's say, center in when we're reactive, how we can come to respond, and then open that up into, like, what we're creating from that, whether if it's, you know, from the masculine or the feminine. But as being the intuitive that you are, what do you feel like more so? Maybe I'm gonna throw in another question here just to kind of guide this a little bit. What do you feel is the most dominant way, reacting or responding, for you?
Well, first of all, before I answer that, I'm gonna just do a little preamble. So I think responding and reacting gives a sense that somehow you have control over that whole process. When actually in relationship, often there's so much that we don't have control over, because you don't have control over what another person's going to do, how they're going to react, and how then this is when your intuitive sense comes into play, right? Because you don't want to necessarily anticipate or preempt, or, you know, this is not a battle. This is just an exchange. It's a dance, right? So I think it's really, like, I think also it's important to say that, you know, it's very difficult to talk about, you know, like, self-development, like basically owning the self, becoming whole, without talking about how we are influenced and how we are getting mirrored by, like, other people in the world, but also in our, like, closest relationships. So coming back to your question, I think in order to be responsive as opposed to reactive, you do really have to have that sense of self-awareness, and I think you have to know when, like, where are your pitfalls, like, where are your kind of, like, where are my buttons, like, where do my buttons get pushed,
like trigger?
Okay. I guess so. Okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the new term.
The new term
people use, triggers. Don't push my button. Now it's like, don't trigger me. It's so interesting how, like, generational concepts, like, just develop that way. You know, we just call them something different.
It's the same thing, but we're like,
Back in the day, they called them engrams.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
I'll break out the ancient knowledge on you. But
well, in yoga they call them samskaras, but
right. Yeah. Let's go deeper. Oh shit, she got me.
Or, like, well, these are, like, are basically our these aspects of self that are kind of like just like our maybe like psychological imprints, you could call them. And yeah, they're like your little, they kind of help you know kind of where you thrive, kind of what's like kind of what you like, what you don't like, where you kind of struggle. So for me, in terms of like, so an example for our audience. Um, so for example, I had someone send me a really shitty email, and it gave me an immediately emotional response. Like I had a real strong emotional response to that, or reaction, should I say? Yeah. So, but I have a choice how to respond, right? I didn't have to automatically like think, oh my god, like this has riled me up. Right, I'm gonna just throw that right back at that person.
But I think that's the key right there. I want to just throw this little thing in there, is that some people do that, and there's that reactive state. Like when you're in that emotional feeling, then you just boom. And I think there's that difference, because what you're about to say is that's a crucial point in time, is that you chose to respond. You didn't choose to act on that reaction and that initial emotional response.
Yeah, but because I know I have done in my part, I have done in my life, and good things don't come from that place. Like no good things can come from that place. Reacting in anger, reacting in and I literally saw red. I said, the old me came through so strong, and I was like, and I had to like be really, really, and I had to really think about like, no, who am I? Like, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? And what is it I'm trying to cultivate from this moment onwards? And it is really about like not having that, like basically not having that energy being inculcated in me. Yeah, and then I chose in the end not to react or not to respond, not to do anything. And I feel like that was the right thing to do. But I think that there's and there's many times that I've done that where there's just a space, and I think I think as a practical point, if you can give yourself as much space between the initial emotion and then what you choose to do, then I think you can have like, you've got a real space to like move with intention, as opposed to like just like someone makes you feel like that, and you do this, and you're kind of in that space,
I like how you said that you wanted to create this result, like what did I want to happen with this? And I think that's the important thing about creating that space, especially just for men. Like I've found that to be very powerful, and just being the spaceman that I am, I'm like, I want to figure out how much space that I can give myself, and within all my different bodies, so that I have that choice and I have that power to not be thrown, emotionally, or situationally, or experientially. If I go through an experience, or if I'm put in a particular situation, I'm not necessarily like taken out of that just by that. Like that's not dictating me, because I think for me, just as growing up as a young man, it was like, and especially like in the hood where I came from, it was always like you never knew. So instead of like an anxiety and like that shit just never really sat with me. Like I can't just be like, oh my god, like trying to wait for things, and I like my body just never like reacted that way. It always kind of just like learned and like adapted and formed, and this is something that we spoke about, is like adaptive strategies. And as I grew up, I looked to like absorb those situations and kind of learn from it, and be like, okay, I'm put in this situation, like, oh, what can I do? Like, what are all the options? But having those capabilities to, and this is what we're gonna kind of talk about a little bit later, is the practicality of it. Like, how do we actually create space? How do we actually gain control of our body and gain control of that signal? Like you said, is the self realization. Can I actually realize in that moment in time that this is happening? And then what do I do with it? And like, what do I need to create that space? And I think time does have a big thing to do with it, but it's also like the temperament in that, because like you said, that really shitty email kind of just like put you in a space of like just seeing red. So we have all of these choices and all these decisions of saying, like, how do I honor my feelings? How do I discern whether this is right and wrong? And one instance for me, just from learning how to create space, was like getting in the ring with people. Like, I learned a lot through not just martial arts, but I guess you would say, I mean, it was fitness. That's what really got me into it, and I wanted to learn the different sports. And then when I got into martial arts, and when you're standing across from somebody, you have to have space within yourself to allow your body to not necessarily react, because if somebody does this and you like, it's like, yo, stop flinching, it's like, reminds you of your uncle or you're like, oh, stop flinching, like, stop, you're like, oh, shit, wait, hold on, what are you doing? But I think in that, that same adaptive strategy kind of allowed me to learn those situations and then learn my body and be like, oh, okay, you can sit back here, and because this person is moving around really quick or they're doing this, you can kind of leverage and see what you need to respond to this, because that for me is, I use that as like a key or like a leverage point in a lot of like the kinesthetic stuff that I do, and like just releasing those things. So yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing to do, to have that, what you said is, see on the other side of what you wanted to create. And this is exactly the tool that we're going to give later, is result-based thinking, but how do we get there?
Yeah.
So when you were talking about like how we react or respond and relate to these, not just ourselves, and like having those talks, and I did that for myself with being in the ring and different situations like that, and you also did it with yourself by seeing this email. But also we want to kind of like put that in the ring of when there's something that you can't control, with dealing with others, and like looking through those facets of the self or the persona or the anima or the animus, like who steps up, So when you place yourself in this world and in the judgmental world that we have, do you feel like you're truly honest with yourself?
I think this is this is why we chose this question, because it's a really good question. Because I would argue that there is no true self outside of relationship. Because actually, everything that we do is like in relation.
My little man mind needs to wrap around that. There's no true self outside of relationship. Okay.
Because to the most extent, we really only know who we are because we're in relationship with others. If we if we were lived in first of all, if we lived like, and I mean completely isolated, i.e. never saw anyone ever at all, then maybe you could say you really, really are your true self. But what would that true self consist of? And I think it's through relationship that we get this mirror, reflecting back at us who we are. And those mirrors, we can choose what those mirrors are, who becomes our mirror in our lives. Because some people don't reflect back what we want.
Love that.
Etc.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yes, love that.
Yeah. So I think to some extent, I don't know if it's possible. Like, I think you can have integrity. I think integrity is possible. I.e., you have a set of values that are very important to you, and you hold those values no matter what the situation or the environment or the person you're dealing with. I think that's very important. But in terms of like, as in not being swayed at all by the people that are in our environment.
Just being honest with yourself.
Oh yeah, I think that's integrity, I suppose, to some extent. Yeah, of being able to say, and this is a hard one for someone. I'm not really a fan of labels, but I definitely meet the criteria of what you would call an empath. So this is somebody who, like, just I'm able to just absorb. I absorb the energy, I absorb the thoughts, the feelings of the environment of people. And so sometimes I'm walking around and I'm experiencing things I have absolutely no idea that it's not mine. So I've had to work really, really, really hard. Like, for me, it's like doubly hard to know what's mine and what's not mine, what's coming from the environment or from other people, and what's actually like what it is that I'm really holding in myself
and manifesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that world that is significantly busy and noisy, let's compare that or correspond that to the judgment. Do you feel like you are still honest with yourself as far as your emotions and your emotional reactions and responses?
I would definitely say I endeavor to be. Like, I feel like there's always that bit of humility in me that kind of allows for, you know, room for error.
Proud, be like, listen, I done worked hard. I did it. I walked this path of emotion. That's what I personally feel like empath is, like the path of emotion. But we're gonna go down a different road with that. But yeah, I think that deserves merit right there. Like, especially just being an empath, and you have this access and this sensitivity, like that activity of those senses. You having that since a kid, you walk this line almost like, and I think just us as people of color, we have the same level of like endurance and stamina because we went through all the hard times. You know what I mean? And because we're at the same place now as maybe other people who had it easy, it's like that's why we're more integral, and that's why we're more, you know, strong minded and the ways that we are, but we also have that emotion. So it's like if you did walk that whole path that way with that level of sensitivity, then yeah, you do have the intelligence. You have the emotional intelligence and the emotional stamina to be like, oh yeah, actually I know exactly what the fuck is mine and what's not because I have to. Because if I walk out in those streets and shit is pulling me different ways, it's like I can't survive. So yeah, it may be a survival mechanism or whatever the case is, but that is something that has given you a strength out of that, you know, because I also feel the same way. You know, I've developed, you know, a lot of emotional intelligence in that way, and I just want to shift this into this masculine side of being like, in when I read that question and like when it came about, I was like, oh, because this was one of the questions that I went through when I was like peeling back the layers of myself. I'm like, oh, okay, you know, everybody's judgmental around you. You feel like you're judging yourself. Like, I was just going back and forth. Like I had myself on the stand. Like, oh, you want to be judgmental, so and you want to blame it on the world, but are you actually honest with yourself? Because you live in this world. Myself was like, what you mean? Like, you know, when somebody lying, they be like, what you mean? Like, you know what I mean? But for me, how it came up, and I love how you said that. This kind of put it in a different frame. I never really looked at it this way. Is I feel like honesty was a when I started to break that down, I was like, okay, well, actually, what's honest? Like, what are you gonna say? But that process of going through that gave me this sense of, okay, it really just means like, am I true to myself? And what I came to learn with truth is that I don't know, maybe this is not for females because y'all just, well, no, I know some. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe this is one of those like shadow light things, whatever it may be. But I feel that there are levels to either truth or, like you said, integrity. And for me, honesty is more on the outside, and it's more on like this superficial level of saying, if you ask me a question, then yeah, I can be honest about it and give you an honest answer. But then I feel like there is another layer that if you just kind of notice something, you're kind of like, hey Max, like, you know, I noticed or like, what's going on? Then you open up a space for me to be transparent. You know, but then I feel like that last layer, which a lot of men have an issue with, is because at our core, I truly believe that a lot of men are truth. It's just that we don't necessarily know how to access it or even express it.
Yeah.
So, and this is a part of the response, you know. And most of the time, it's just like, oh, I'm gonna react. You ask me a question, so I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah.
So I keep it out here.
Yeah.
There's that level of vulnerability. And vulnerability is really like, can I offer you this truth and offer you this information without you asking about it, seeing it, or anything?
Yeah.
You know? And I feel like in that I was like, oh wow, like yeah, I need to practice more of that. Because this world is so judgmental and there's so many things going on, And also, if I let that seep in and it's in my head and I'm consistently judging myself for seeing this and blah, blah, I'm trying to be a perfectionist and da 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 da, then I'm like, okay, then I'm not necessarily being true to myself.
Yeah.
So if I found that truth and I let myself stray away from it, how can I do that if I'm gonna be judgmental? So that's part of that, like, almost fortifying and preserving that like, you know, centered truth. That's just been for me.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would just say, I think something else you said, you know, in the beginning, in terms of being goal orientated, oftentimes we're deceitful because we have a goal in mind and we feel that if we're honest, we might not get what we want down the line. And so, yeah, sometimes I think those can be the reasons. That's the motivation for dishonesty, as opposed to just feeling like you're going to be judged. But there might be a sense of like, actually, there's something I want further down the line, and if I'm too honest about this right now, then that might not get to that. You know what I mean? And then
so is that why sometimes, like, when you're out on the street and, like, you know, you talk, and I know that this happens to me. Well, maybe it's because I'm a guy. Maybe I've been doing that anyway. No, because I see females do it. Like, I feel like it is this thing of like, yeah, girl, you know, I'm gonna see you tomorrow, and then later on, it's like, yeah, I wasn't feeling it. No, I wasn't. I didn't really. But you just like say it in that moment, because like, if I'm honest and be like, nah, actually, I don't really like vibe with you, and I don't want to hang out with you anymore, then that person's gonna what? Like, be like, oh, like what?
Yeah.
So is that something that like
100%,
stops me because you're goal oriented? You're like, I just want to like not be around you now, and then like avoid you later.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely done that. I really work hard.
I respect it.
I really work hard not to do that now. So if I really like, so if I know I'm not feeling something, and compassion as well. Not just be like, I'm not feeling it. No. Like, I mean, there's ways to say, you know, like, I have plans, or like, I can't,
hey,
or
like, you were cool, but I actually
or you don't even
like your face.
I mean, you don't have to say that. I mean, there's honesty, and then there's like brutal, like, you know.
But like, then that's why I'm saying is like, there's that level of honesty that's at the superficial layer.
Yes.
And then there's the truth. Oh no, this is why.
Yeah.
So I feel like we have to put it through those layers and then be like, oh, okay, you know, I can be honest with you. But in that sense of like being honest with yourself, it's like you would have to ask yourself, like, even in that moment that you said when you got the email, you know?
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, I guess, like, what was maybe I'll ask you that, like, what was your process to come to that truth of like what was the bottom? Because I feel like in that reactive state, like, some people may be experiencing that of like, oh, okay, like I just feel something and like I go on it, and like, how do I stop that? And it's like, oh, okay, can I actually slow down and create this other tributary and look at my relationship and be like my relationship with that email or that person, and say, okay, I actually have an ability to respond to that.
Yeah.
But also there's that level of honesty with yourself of like, what is actually here?
Yeah.
Is that something that you go through to
so
like filter that?
I guess I see it as like, I mean, so I play chess. I love chess. Now, chess is a long game, right? So, you know, and there's a few layers.
I mean, it's a long game if you're good.
Well, yeah.
If your shit is short.
But you know, like there's low hanging fruit, right? There's low hanging fruit, which you could just take. You know, if you play chess, like, I'm just gonna take everyone out. I'm just gonna take people out. Well, that's gonna be a very short game, right? Yeah. So like in the long run, there's low hanging fruit, i.e., like, you know, we live in a very competitive world that encourages us to be adversarial and like, I'm not having that. I'm not gonna have someone like, you know, and then we have to prove ourselves and all the rest of it. But I think if you think about it, on a chessboard, for me anyway, that personal situation, that's like a pawn on the board. I'm like, do I take the pawn out or just leave him there? Actually, I know I want to go. I know where I'm going. I'm going to go for the jugular. So for me, that's not something that I really want to expend too much energy on, because I'm like, you know, I want to go for the long, you know, I'm going for the long strategy. And like, okay, so for me, my value is happiness, joy. Like, I want more peace and happiness. Anything that's kind of taking me away from that, that's my long-term goal. And so, in the short term, I could have, like, you know, had an argument and, like, you know, stood up for myself and sort of like had a go at it with someone, and, you know, and kind of, you know, have that, you know, go at it like back and forth. But in the end, that's a waste of energy. And that takes me away from my ultimate goal. And so for me, it just felt like, yeah, that's like something I can just, that's not something I need to bring into play right now. It's like, you know, am I going to go for the pawn? Am I going to go for, I'm going to take out someone's rook?
So I hear that, and I love that analogy of the chessboard, right? But I don't like to play games.
Yes.
So
true.
When I look at that,
True.
I'm like, oh, I'm gonna take this pawn out, and I'm gonna keep going for the rook, because I don't want that little pawn to be sneaking over here and like put me in a precarious situation anyway. And I feel like some men in that way, like we think like that, you know, we want to go straight through it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like that is like a beautiful like concept of like grace. To be like, okay, like I'm choosing happiness over that. Like I know that this pawn is not necessarily gonna do that. And I 100% see the value in that, because there's also times like I say the same thing, to give myself that space to really say, okay, am I responding to this like yes or no? But then also there's that part where I say, okay, actually, and I ask that to like all my facets. I'm like, yo, anybody want to address this shit? Because I'm about to go back out there, you know? And then they're all just like, yeah, no, we good. Like, we got other stuff to do. Or one person's like, Shadow's like,
yeah, I'll take
like,
this.
You're up. Get out there. I'm going to go have a drink. Shadow's like,
come on.
But I feel like that happens the same way, you know, even with myself in those situations. Like, when I put myself in a situation like, oh shit, like, damn, like, do I need to just like be reactive, or like, do I need to respond to this? And then sometimes I'm like, okay, don't say anything. Also, so I feel like yes, I think I hear it more in a sense of like when people say, you know, what is it? Choose your battles. Is that what they say? Yeah, because I never really listened to that. So yeah, it's like choosing your battles.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's this ability, and I think this is the empowerment of it. And behind yours, it sounds like it's that grace. You know, it's the grace to say, okay, this thing right here is just a pawn, but what is my long-term goal? And like you said, that result-based thinking is happiness. So even in that state of like being, you know, frustrated or frazzled or however you may have been, it's like, can I look past that? Can I keep my head above the water to kind of like stay afloat and be like, okay, like this too shall pass, like, and keep bringing that in?
Because that's really important, because in that moment, yes, there was like obviously a charged emotional response, but had I engaged and reacted, that would have extended, that would have continued, that would have gone on.
But what was your process for like honoring that? Like honoring whatever that emotion, like whether it was anger, sadness, frustration, pain, whatever it was, like, or do you just, because I feel like some would kind of look at that and be like, okay, well then how do I get past like spiritual bypassing, like, oh, I'm just gonna choose love and light and happiness. I know that you actively did a process.
Yeah.
But I think when you're just kind of coming into that, with people that don't necessarily have that ability to navigate, or that emotional intellect, or that empath, that's what we should say, empath intellect. Should be a new like coined phrase. You know, like that don't have that strength. How is there something that you kind of work through that to be honest with yourself, rather than judging yourself, being like, oh, well, you're not necessarily doing, you need to say this to that person, or you need to respond to this email. Yeah,
I think like, I mean, in that situation, like having people to soundboard off, like having somewhere to put that, you know, like having somewhere to basically rant, have a little rant, and be like, you know, and like just get it out. And then I'm like, oh, okay, it didn't necessarily need to be at the source. But yeah, let's have some people to listen to me and basically go, they're well out of order. And be like, yeah, they're bloody well out of order. And then you're like, and then I've been witnessed, I've been seen, and then I'm like, okay, cool, this is what's happening. And then there's a process of just allowing that and that's kind of been my process, is always just, I feel the emotion just move down my body, and it, usually it feels like something physical sometimes. I can really feel it in like, and then it has to, it moves down, and it sometimes takes a few days. But yeah,
I feel like that is a good point that you said, to have somebody that's around, or even have a thing, like, you know, whether it's journaling or whatever the case is. But also, I have to play devil's advocate here, and this kind of also like leads into the second question of like, I think also that kind of brings this concept of like, oh well, I don't want to like, you know, tell this to that person, or like dump this on that person, or to like stop those thoughts too, because our mind is very like brilliant, and we have all of these different facets, like how we just spoke, and then that shadow can be coming in like, oh, don't say that, because you know that person doesn't give a fuck about you, like why would they care about your problem? And it's like, oh, okay, then I'm not. And you kind of like almost disempower yourself in that moment in time to say like, okay, I'm stuck between this reaction, and I'm trying to create a response, but I've done that so many times, and then been like, oh, well, I don't want to make my problems, and you kind of like stay in this like limbo. So it's like, do you become aware of those projections of the things that you're placing on, like in relation to those people? Because whether if it's a friend or a family member, or maybe even your journal, or whatever the hell you're doing, you know, because everything is relational. Like, is that necessarily a projection, or what's your process of like doing that? Because for me, I don't necessarily have like soundboards as like people. I kind of either use like a journal or like my tape recorder. So in that sense of like, how would you, I guess, leverage that concept of being a projection or not being a projection? And aren't you a projector?
I am, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, should I use another example, like another?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if it brought you that awareness of the projection.
Yeah, because I think in that situation, I think I went and sent like a 15-minute voice note to my friend that was basically like, oh my god, like just complete long rant, which I then deleted because I was like, no, she's having a nice evening with her boyfriend, she's chilling out, she's had a stressful week, and I was like, no, like that's not what she needs. And I knew at some point I would speak to her, because she's my best friend, I would speak to her all the time, so like I knew at some point I'm going to speak to her and tell her, and then like, you know, I'll share that, like, so it wouldn't have, so I knew that at some point I would share it, but it didn't feel like that was the right way to share it in that moment. And
so that is the awareness of the projection onto somebody else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so for me, I have this, I think I'm pretty aware of me projecting onto other people, because I like to take, in fact, I think sometimes I take too much responsibility of like what emotions or like what things I'm placing into this thing, but I'm very also like, I practice my discernment to know, like you said, you know, like, oh, that's your shit, this is my shit. Like, don't make me say that your shit is my shit, because I'm not, like, you know, I'm pretty good at that. But there is sometimes this awareness of a projection of that this person has the same level of emotion. Not saying that I have more, but that they're eye to eye with me. I have this sense of, when I relate to people, I'm like, oh, this is the mirror. And like when you said earlier, when you were like, we can create different mirrors, that I was like, wow, like that's fucking mind blowing to me. Because I'm like, oh, yeah, but also I can play devil's advocate in that, but we're not gonna go there. But there's this awareness that, okay, Max, you need to look at them and like have that compassion and say, okay, you know, they're having a great evening with their boyfriend, blah blah blah, whatever. I'm not gonna say X, Y, and Z, but also understand, like for me, I go through this process of saying like, okay, nobody's gonna fucking understand what you're talking about, Max, because look where you just came from, look where you just discerned that all the way from, and actually look what you're going through. Okay, great. Take that and bring it up a level. Okay, now where can you put this? Like, who can, if it's something I need to like express or like speak out, or even if I'm in relationship with somebody, I'm like, okay, don't address this right now because we're not at that level. And I think that comes with that sensitivity, like we spoke about, as being an empath or being sensitive to emotions in that way. If I notice that, so for example, right, the guy that I sold my quad, where I bought my quad from, right? So when I sold it, I went back to speak to him, and I had the same composure that when I addressed it last time. I was like, hey, like, what's up? But I'm conscious of his personal life, of his business life, of his stress, and then walking into the space feeling like what the present moment is, and like placing myself in that moment in time, and choosing, I guess that was the choosing of the mirror that I wanted to see. So it was like, I need to show up like that. I need to show up in my truth and in my integrity and be honest with myself, and that is going to be conveyed to him. And he ultimately like went into his mode. So if I see you all the way up here, I'm not going to shift and like react and like have you pull me up there, because that's no, like, I can't do that. And as a man, I'm like, you have control of my emotion, basically. And it's like, nah, I gotta control my emotion, you know what I'm saying? So whether it be in that level, and it was like, I know that you have no, like, what you're saying is false, but I'm not gonna project this sense of like me being right and me being honest and me being righteous to kind of pull you down here, like, because then that's going to take me up there. So this sense of like anger and disdain and contention and all these different things that was there, it, for me to have this position of how I'm relating with him is still staying like in that same composure. So that allowed me the ability to be empowered by, I have a choice. Like, I'm definitely not going to react because I see this and I already know what the situation is. But I walked in with a sense of having this, I guess, empowerment, you could say, that I have a choice to respond, or I have a choice to create what I want. It doesn't even have to be a response, because point blank period, I had a result as well. All he need, I was just going there. I was going out there at the kindness of my heart. I didn't even have to be there. I didn't even address with him all the other shit that like he did wrong, and I didn't even address it. I was like, okay, what is the result you want to create? You just want to have a smooth transition for these other people that are coming to him with the same situation that you came to him with. So I'm seeing this comparison and this similarity, and to save face for them, I wanted to make sure he was okay with the same situation, out of courtesy. So that was the result that I wanted to create, and continuously being like tethered into that. I didn't even have to respond like yes or no, and I didn't even have to react. So I had this ability to just completely create what result that I wanted. And it sounds like you were going through that the same way, just internally, like when you were dealing with it in yourself. So there is like this, and this is exactly what this episode is about, is about that ability to react, to respond, but ultimately, create, but also in that relation like you had with yourself, and dealing with it like internally, and being like, okay, like, I've developed this fortitude and I've developed this, and okay, like, how do I, and then you said, it's like even in the body, like allowing it to go down. And I remember I even shared this experience with you, and you were like, oh my god, like the adrenaline would just have me rushing, and I'm like yeah, I've been in more dangerous situations. So like that level of adrenaline, it starts to actually have a physiological shift on you when you start to place yourself in that empowerment. And the same way for you, like that emotional rush, it's just chemical responses. I mean, yes, we can go into the spiritual and be like, yes, you need to honor your emotions and these things, and this is your sense. But you allowing it to like kind of like sift through your body and like allow your body to feel it, that's a lot more like somatic. So there's a lot of different approaches that we can take, and I feel like that is something, like, since you had mentioned that about going through the body, I'm like, maybe that's something I need to practice a little bit more of, like allowing my body to feel it. And maybe some men, I mean, I feel like if there's any guys listening to this, like, how do you, I guess that's an important question, like how do you receive those things? Because if you're receiving it and you're processing it in your body, or you're processing it in your mind, to create those things, it's like they have different results. There's different ways to get the same result.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I guess for me, the somatic process feels more like I've actually done with the emotion. So all right, it takes a little bit longer in the first instance, but I genuinely managed to shift that emotion from my body. Whereas I think when we maybe more intellectual approach, sometimes that emotion stays in the body without realizing, and you've kind of intellectualized, like, oh yeah, I understand what's happened here, and you've kind of like, and I've definitely done that as well. Like, it's definitely something I still do to a certain extent. Kind of like intellectualizing how I feel, like kind of analyzing it from above, and and kind of having like, just having a narrative about it or something like that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I feel it and it actually moves through me. So sometimes actually I'm like quite grateful when I have like a strong emotion, because I'm like, okay, cool, that's something to work with.
So in that somatic process, because now I'm like listening to it more, because I think for me personally, I do allow myself to feel it a little bit, to notice it, and like that's how I know what it is. And then I like, my discernment comes in, and I'm like, okay, do you want to feel that? Like, is that yours? Like, is that not? Do you need to like be? And that gives me the response. So just going through that process, and you were saying like there's this result on the other side, like, is that a process? Yeah. What facet would you say that process goes through to actually create that life or that result?
Yeah. So I think, sorry, my mind is going, I'm just thinking about what you said, and I just want to just respond quickly to something you said, because I feel like, because clearly, like, both of us, we have like a very different process, and I think that's really interesting. And I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think there's like, I don't think there's like, oh, you should be doing more somatic, I should be doing, you know what I mean? Like, I think, because I'm kind of like imagining you, and I'm like, I don't know if that would, like, would that really work?
Well, it's
or
not
like,
necessarily for me. I'm just asking you yours, because by you sharing your process, and just like even in the last episode, you were talking about this sense of like me being able to step back and like see things and organize. That is what some people would say intellectualizing, but for me, intellectualizing means tapping into the intelligence that's within our body. And by tapping into that intelligence, it's going into this higher space of like observance and allowing yourself, like, I can go into my body and feel it, like when I'm in a workout, when I'm writing a poem, when I'm having a conversation with my daughter, all these different things. I allow my body to feel these different things, but to have that ability to step back and sit into this intelligence and like observe it and witness it, but practice non-involvement, that for me is like a meditation. But to understand this process, and like this was the third question about, because we had already went into the process, it's like, what facet do you feel like that's coming from? Like, maybe if it's cognition, or maybe if it's in the body, or maybe if it's in the arcana, like where do you feel like you're most likely creating that process to create that result?
What facets? I think I use, like, the first one is reason. I definitely think like it comes through like, what?
Okay, sorry, just go ahead.
So I think it's reason, because it can only be reason that says, to me, it can only be some like higher voice of some kind, or some kind of clear voice that says, hey, you know what? Right now, this ain't a good idea to do this, this, and this. Breathe, feel what you're feeling. Give yourself a few days, and then do X, Y, and Z. So I'm like, what else is that coming from? That's not my immediate body reaction. Yeah, I'm aware of my body action, but it's my reason that says, oh, this is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling this. Okay, what do we do now? Right, well, I'm going to sit with it and feel it. That's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to give myself a couple of days. And then when I've given myself some time, then I'll look at it again, see how I feel again, and make another choice from there. And that was it. That was the decision process in that. So I do think it comes from so although the emotion is there, I think there's something else that says take this course of action.
But that something else is reason for you.
I think so. Or you could call it, I mean, yeah, call it reason, higher self.
But see, this is the interesting thing that I find is that, like, you being intuitive, I would automatically think that you would say it's your intuition that says it, because reason is more of like a masculine higher faculty, but we all have these higher faculties, and like reason, intuition.
I mean, I'd argue that they're something similar, because I guess they're in the
new episode starting right in the middle of this one.
But there's something in the realm of wisdom, I suppose. That's, I guess, and maybe there's like, so maybe you could say wisdom is the optimal thing, and then how we access it is like through the facet of intuition, through reason,
Okay, so that's how you feel like you create that result that you're looking for.
Yeah, I feel so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where would you say is the most tension between either of those facets?
I think the tension is between like the gap between the reason and the emotion. So what your emotion, like the charge of your emotion, and what it wants to, you know, in that moment, whatever you want to achieve. Like usually if it's an uncomfortable emotion, I'm like, I just don't want to feel, like whatever I can do to just get this off me. Like that's what you'll do, whether that be, you know, have a drink, have a smoke, you know, I don't know, go and do some activities that are not necessarily good, but they numb you out. So I think it's like that's where the tension is between what your body wants in that moment, and then actually what your reason is saying, like actually long term, this is the better thing. Like actually, you know what, I want to show that person, you know, what I'm made of. No, I actually don't need to prove anything. Like, and that's my reason saying, you know, you don't need to prove anything. But like there's another part of me that's like, no, you know what I mean? Like, and so there's that, I think that's where the tension is. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there's like in that distance between the body and what I have like a reference to, like the subtle body.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so for you, what would you say the facet that you, what would you say is your,
to create that result?
Yeah.
Now that we're going into higher faculties, I would most likely say I have been utilizing imagination, because I do have a tendency to and just recently as well, is exercising the higher faculties and learning how to make them stronger, learning how to make them a lot more sensitive. But I think what I've come to notice is that I've always utilized imagination because I like to create. And for me to create, like I find like I'm very like sacral driven. Like I'm a generator. So everything for me is like sacral. And like and this is all in hindsight that I've come to learn about myself, and like developing these sensitivities and like paying attention and bringing awareness to all these different ways. It was imagination of, because I always wanted to create, whether it be in a situation like, you know, when I was younger, and like I wasn't in a one-on-one fight, like in a legal fight, until like I was probably like in my, not even then, maybe like in my 20s, and just going ham. And it would always be situations where like it would be a group of guys trying to jump me. So I would always have like this, I was always like quick and witty when I was younger. It was just like, I was just always on point. Just anytime like somebody would try to say something, I'm like, oh, then like here it is, you know? So it would always be these situations where situationally I would have this imagination to like create something, because I would be feeling into like whether I walked into a new block and like there was a group of guys across the street, and of course most likely I was with some chick, or you know, it was maybe one of their sisters or like their cousin or a girl that they liked, and then they would get emotional, but I would like always sense it and have this like intuitive kind of like space around me, and then I would always create the results that like I needed. Either like we went up to her crib, or like we got in the car and we went somewhere, or like one of my boys showed up. Like even like just creating things like that. And I feel like those higher faculties of like being able to create an image and bring that to reality is kind of like what we're talking about, in this sense of I didn't even have to respond to a lot of other things, and I definitely have never, I could probably say that, and haven't really been a reactive kind of person. Um, but yeah, even just creating those things. But also, what I would say is just to kind of layer that is that there was this other, like this facet that it was playing through cognitively through the shadow, is because I would always like to do like this mischievous kind of creation, you know, like, oh, what can you create? Like, you know, you shouldn't be creating this, but let's fucking do it, you know? And yeah. It was it wasn't more of like the me like trying to create things. Like there was ways of that, but I would definitely say that that was the facet that I more so created these projections from, you know? And it was the projection of what I wanted to create, you know? And whether it would be result based or something that was not a result that I wanted, but truly the shadow wanted. And I think that was where, like, because I feel like those facets, those higher faculties give power through the lens that you know, you give it to, whether if it's yourself, whether it's your anima, your animus, or whatever the case is. Like wherever you place that higher faculty in your cognition, then you allow that power to go to that one. That's why I say that that other layer was the shadow. So like me being very comfortable in the space that I am, like even being a shadow coach is like because I'm very comfortable in that space. Like I don't have no beef with my shadow. Like my shadow, like we cool, right? Like it was this beautiful thing that kind of happened. So for me, I would say that this level of tension that I feel is not necessarily, well, let me say what it, let me not say what it's not. It would be in, I guess, being okay with it, and like accepting that, okay, like I'm trusting that my shadow like has my best interest at heart, you know. And I'm also trusting that I'm not gonna imagine something that is the worst, you know. And then that gives me the ability to exercise my other faculties of, you know, whether it be reason and be like, okay, is this reasonable to create this? Is this reasonable to imagine this? You know, like, should you be imagining this? And I'm like, yes, yes, you should, because this is exactly what you want to do. Same situation with the guy with the quad, right? I, you know, I know, and I'm creating this image, like I'm telling him, like, hey, this, and he's just going off, like, get the fuck out, like screaming, all this stuff, right? And I'm looking at him and I'm smiling because I'm like, I want to give him a smile. Like I don't want him to be upset, but it's also like I know why he's upset, and my shadow's like, keep smiling. It's gonna piss him off more. And I'm like, no, but I actually do. I'm just like, I genuinely wish good for you, man. But like, you don't have to smile and say goodbye, have a nice day. He's like, get up. So I think it's like that part of like still being okay with like, oh, you're still choosing your happiness and you're still choosing like this path of like joy, you know. So yeah, I guess there could be some tension in that, but I also believe in, you know, again, this result based thinking, but also like structured tension. And for structured tension is like when we have this result that's on the other side. For me, like in a, and I'm gonna shift this conversation a little bit to come into my space a little bit, which is in the quantum physics of it, right? In like the quantum realm, I believe that we have to have tension to either magnetize things to us or magnetize ourselves to them to get out of those situations. So if I can structure a level of tension towards, let's say, my shadow, and I can structure this tension to be, let's say, more charged, I want to say, whether I want to magnetize it to me or me to it, then I have that choice. So with this, I've come to understand that, like, on a different level, and like this is stepping back into like life force, is a little bit past the intellect. It's like a little bit deeper in the subtle level of saying, like, okay, if I can tap into this life force and I can actually create whatever I want, then I know that I can charge it this way to create this result. To not have any tension with being okay with it, I can actually dissolve that tension because I'm leaning into it. Because I'm also asking myself, okay, why is this tension actually there? So even in that space, right? Let's take, for example, the same situation on a more subtle level of that happening on the physical, and I'm understanding and I'm kind of like shifting and transforming, like what's going on, shifting his energy. There was this subtle like observance, and this is where I feel like the self was, and I also feel like it was more of like the anima as well, like this female aspect of saying, like, why, like she was like this, the feminine aspect of the male was basically saying, okay, like, you shouldn't feel okay like just smiling, like you need to have more compassion, you need to have this, and this self was like, this is my expression of compassion, and like this is, it was kind of like almost them kind of relating to each other, and she almost had this like not disdain, but almost like, oh, it should look like this, and the self was kind of like, no, like, you're one half of a whole, but you need to see this, and this is my expression of compassion, because by me doing this is why. So like that was also like that exercising of like the higher reason. So I feel like what I've come to learn with a lot of men as well is that we have this like self-criticism and like judgment and all these other things that happen behind the fact, because like women being more embodied, it's like, oh, I want to feel it in my body, and like this is why I'm just allowing this emotion to be, and like accepting it and receiving it and things like that. But a lot of men, we have that disconnect from the body in that way, so we kind of just say, okay, like, this is what I'm doing, because that's going to create the result, don't do anything. And also like with that numbing, whether if it's through vaping, through video games, through isolation, whatever the case is, whatever coping mechanism you have, it's just you kind of, and it's cognitive dissonance, it's emotional dissonance, and really it's just a distance between that. So with that understanding and that bridging of those relations between that self and the other part of the self, they can come to learn each other to reduce that tension that I have within myself, to say why I'm doing it. So I'm not just saying like, oh, stay to the side, this is who I am. It was like, hey, come over here, like, this is where that tension is. So it was almost this invitation for her to come in and see this and be like, this is compassion, this is my level of compassion, and like, if you have another way, voice yourself, but also, this is compassion.
I love it. It sounds like you got like a council of different faculties that you draw on in different situations, and they all get their chance to like have their opinion, and then like.
Well, yeah, I believe in the idea of democracy. So even like, we spoke in the last episode of this construct of the past. You have your persona, you have the anima and the animus, the self and the shadow. I believe in harmony, and that is what is in my internal core for my mind. Not necessarily my spirit. I feel like my spirit is just pure harmony, but it's like we have to tap into that. So what gets in the way? Ourself, and ourself is like in the mind. So if I can begin to create harmony within these facets, then that can help to make things a lot more easeful. And me, I'm a person of balance. So it's like, okay, I need to have balance, and balance is just like another way of harmony, So that same way that I kind of expressed like honesty being outside, transparency being a little bit closer, and then more profound, it's like vulnerability. It's like that same level, but on the outside it's like balance, and then there's harmony, and then there's like bliss, I guess you would say, or whatever.
Yeah. Just oneness, union.
Yeah. So it's like when I see these different facets, instead of my mind kind of playing those tricks on me, and this is a way of empowerment rather than like gaining command of your mind and like control your mind. It's like no, because when you are controlling your mind, whether that be in meditation or just in conversation or in a situation, whatever it is, then there is an implication that there's something being controlled. And that is never balanced for me, you know. And then also with control, you have a level of resistance somewhere. So I believe in this sense of structured tension, because if I structure it just right, then it can just all flow sustainably, you know.
So interesting, so interesting. Because I like it, because it's like you know, like, because in a way there's a kind of compartmentalization happening, but also it's very organic, because it feels like you're like really in touch with these different sides or different parts of yourself that kind of bringing something, like offering you a different means for which to like navigate your reality, basically, or relationships. And that's like I found that fascinating. You're like super aware of like literally like it's just
I feel like I think a lot of us, and even just doing a lot of the learning and, you know, all of these different things, and going to school and learning the protocols and blah blah, it's like I feel that sense of, or like you said, being organic, you know. And as a man, I understand that there's order and there's structure, and there's, you know, without order and structure, you have to understand that there's chaos, and without chaos, there's no order, and vice versa. So if there's this polarity, and I choose to see everything in a whole, it's like, what makes me think that I'm any different, you know? If my emotions are this way, my emotions have polarity and they have opposites, and I'm trying to do this, it's like, okay, let me work through that. Let me understand these emotions, but also the things that are controlling the emotions, the things that are witnessing the emotions, like I need to like have a relationship with them too. You know, because if not, then you're just responding from the mind. Then you're just like this guy that's like, okay. And it's like, are you actually connecting? Are you relating?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also just coming back to our second question on like on projection. That's exactly how we end up projecting onto other people, is by not being aware of that, those tensions that are happening inside of us, and then we end up just outsourcing them or placing them upon other people. So and then that just plays out in ways that like
So do you feel like you've been in relations or relationships, even partnerships, where that projection has been there because of that lack of awareness?
Oh yeah, definitely. And on both sides. Like, you know, there's definitely, I think,
but I mean, also, you were just in your nature, because that's in your human design. You're a projector.
That's true.
That would be spiritual bypassing.
Which is basically, but from what I understand, projector is just being like an empath and just reflecting that back at like into your kind of. But no, definitely. I think like projection happens when you don't have the capacity to see things as they really are. You seeing things as you want them to be, or how you're anticipating them to be. If you're not like, and that's to do with, like you said, it's like to do with your level of awareness, right? Because depending on how aware you are, probably is going to dictate how much you project,
right?
Because you're kind of in a like you're basically unconscious is playing havoc out into the world. So definitely I've had that. Things definitely 100%. I get a lot of projections onto me, actually, because I think people immediately read me in a certain type of way, and then have that expectation, and then obviously like it takes time to get to know somebody, and actually as people find out about who you actually are, it doesn't match like the initial kind of projection that has been
you've created
in your head. They have created upon and I definitely have done that myself.
That is a big one. That is like a whole nother expectations are like oh, I want to fight them. Oh, anyway, I mean,
all right. So this is another show. This is definitely another show
because I feel like exactly that, and I think that has been such a, for me, I'm very keen on dissolving any resistance like within myself, you know, and I can't really own up to the whole fact of like, oh, the path of least resistance. I feel like no, because then I need to earn my shit. So it's also just like, okay, where can I learn and earn on this path that I'm creating, like actively, like walking through the jungle, chopping shit down because I want to go into the unknown. But also, where can I relieve the tension that's in my hand when it's trying to cramp up because I can't hold on to the machete? Like that's what I'm looking for. Because as men, like I've noticed that in the work that I've done, with myself, is that it's exactly what you said, is this projection of what we have yet to become aware on ourselves, and I'm just projecting that out. And I truly believe that that's where all these like narratives come from, and the reason why people have these coping mechanisms, and they're addicted to porn, they're addicted to vaping, or they have the chick with all the fake everything, and it's just like, okay, cool, bro, like, but then you get upset because of like all these other things, so you like create your own nightmare, but then you complain about it. So I knew that that's not what I wanted to be. So instead of focusing on that, I was like, oh, do this. But now these whole faculties, all these things that you've learned about, and you see that we have these abilities, exercise that. Because, I started out in fitness. So I was like, oh, everything you can exercise. Lift everything. But when you, just to kind of come around to what you were saying, like it happened on both sides. So obviously that has happened in your past, and you're going towards this future, and you sound like bringing this thing of result-based thinking into the future. What would be something that you would want to keep or say to your beloved or beloved?
Beloved. What do you want to say? What I want to say to my beloved? The reason why we had this question is two-pronged, right? And the reason why we had this question, because I put this question. Okay.
I was completely thrown by it. But sure.
So, because I thought it was a really interesting in this particular episode where we're talking about projection, we're talking about the other, we're talking about this dance, and I think I was curious to know when I explored this question whether or not like the thing that I want to hear is the same as the thing that I actually want to say, and is there a relationship between those two things? And there really was, like, my instant thing. It was really connected. I had to work really, really hard to separate, actually. So
I want to know what that was first, and then where you came in with the ego to separate it.
To change it. Yeah, because I was like, okay, so there's the thing that, like, so what was the first question? What would I want my beloved to know? So I feel like what I would want my beloved to know. So at first it was kind of like, I think, and then this is like, this is, I'm owning this here, like someone with an abandonment wound. Like, basically it was like, I just want to hear, I'm not going anywhere. Basically, that's what I want to hear. That's what I want to say. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. Like, don't, like, that is kind of that safety, that basically. And then I thought, yeah, that's definitely what I would want to hear from my beloved. And then I was thinking, okay, is that what I would want to say? And I was thinking, well, maybe that's not what my beloved would want to hear, because maybe they don't have the same, that same need, basically. And so I was thinking, okay, what would I want my beloved to hear? And I think it's that, I guess, I feel like I'm always growing towards the light, and I would want my beloved to know that in the relational space, that everything that I'm doing is in an attempt to grow more towards the light. If that I'm someone who is really about self-development, shining a light on things, because I think that is where it gets so difficult in the relational space, is when, like we say, like, this is kind of how it fits into the episode, is that, like, we project, we have expectations, we kind of have got all of these different facets of ourselves that can start to complicate the purity of love, basically. And I think my my what I would want my beloved to know is that I would do everything within my power to basically uphold and maintain the purity of that love. And if that means like through looking at my stuff or that self-development and that work, and that being, or not work, or maybe not work,
I mean, hey, it can still be work.
I mean, it's, yeah, or effort, let's say effort, attention, energy, commitment, devotion, even, to that task. Yeah.
And what would you want to hear from them?
I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for life. I'm down, ride or die, whatever the weather, whatever happens, whatever comes. I'm here and I'm down.
Okay. That's not the abandonment issue talking. Okay. Perfect. Come through, beloved. Shout out, Ricky. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And also, like, and then I realized, oh, well, I would want the same. I would want my beloved to, be interested in self-development and upholding the purity of, like, so it's just a really interesting thing. Like, I was like, oh yeah, well, obviously I would want to hear that as well. But like, yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Mike, over to you.
I thought about this a lot. Like, a lot. And I really started out with the second portion of the conversation. I mean, the second portion of the question. Because I was like, I feel like my initial response to it, I was like, oh, well, my presence is just going to speak whatever I speak to my beloved. So what do I want to hear from them? And I was like, kind of the same situation. I was like, oh, I'd want to hear a resonance, like the same resonance coming back. But again, like, that was the reaction, and what it really came down to, I was like, okay, this is like one of the portions of the advice that kind of came after this, like going into building this, was I asked myself in a different way of like, what would I want to sip from my beloved, rather than necessarily hear, because like I feel like hearing, and not just like hearing, but like in a sense of like receiving and like listening and all those different things, it was like, because I know that I can nourish myself and I'm self-nourished and I have this light and this truth and all these different things, what else, like the only thing that is there for my beloved that I would like want or desire is nourishment. So I was like, okay, this concept of sip, right? And it's the structures that are in place. And this is something that I find truly empowering, because I value strength in like my mirror, or like my partner, or my divine union that I seek, because that is what I've cultivated in the feminine that's in me. I've taken like that masculine place and like shifted the rocks for her to be able to flow naturally and organically. And that for me was like, okay, I needed to put these different structures in place so that she can flow, so that her flow can ultimately nourish me. So when I thought about that, like on a physical realm, I was like, okay, that is my beloved, but it really came down to, if I wanted to hear anything from her, it would just be, because I'm trying to turn this, because it was a taste, and I'm like, that was the sense of the nourishment was, I guess that can be a sound in a way of like pleasantry. I guess that would be the sound.
Yeah.
Because it was more so like sipping it, and we actually kind of mentioned it earlier, harmony. But I think if harmony had like a sound, or like a hearing, would be like, it's pleasant, because for me it was this sense of the river, and the river, like when you hear a river, I guess that's pleasant. So whatever that sound is, I would want to hear her flow. you know, like, and that rhythm, that resonant, maybe rhythm is like that resonance, you know. And I guess I would find pleasantry in that, and that nourishes me. So her just being in flow. And yeah, I think what I would want to say to her, I think, I feel like I would want to say, definitely won't be a meow, but I feel like I would want to say that she will be loved. My beloved, because I'm trying to say, like, what would I say to that version of myself? And it's like, what would you say to that beloved? It's like, she will be loved. You know, as long as, like, there is that space, and honestly, like, no matter what space there, in all those ways, like, she will just be loved. Then, because I'm gonna be loved. Period. So it's like, okay, that's the only thing that I can say for you, because everything else is gonna speak for itself. And that's just the level of big dick energy I'm coming into this with. You know?
Like, just gotta balance it up. We've done like something really, really deeply vulnerable there. Like, that is so beautiful. That's so beautiful. I want to take mine back now and do mine again.
Nope, you can't.
That is so beautiful, and I really felt that. Like, I really felt like, you know, and I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to do here is kind of like model how, like, that's really vulnerable. That's it was really vulnerable for both of us, and I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to model. Like, that is like just that process. So yeah, thank you for going there.
It is a process, and maybe that's where I'm at right now, but we won't go into that. But I feel like, you know, I think we definitely resonate on this with the same, the quote of, you know, you can only see somebody as deep as you see yourself. And for me, seeing is loving. Like, if you can only love somebody as deep as you love yourself. So when you meet somebody at that level, or they taking you to that place where you're looking at that relation between the two, and you're being, you know, or they're triggering you, or they're reacting to you, or they're pushing your buttons, you have to ask yourself, like, okay, what am I trying to teach myself in this? What am I trying to learn? You know, and not in a sense of like a bad way, like you're punishing yourself, but looking at somebody else with that compassion, as like you said, is changing that mirror. You know, like, you have the choice to see them in that way. And I think if we all took that one step to even just ask that one question of, like, okay, what am I trying to teach myself, or what am I trying to learn right here? Because in that, like, we can look past that person and look a little bit deeper and be like, oh, okay, this is how I need to be loved, not how I need to be loved, but how I need to be loved right now, here in this moment. And I think if we did more of that, that would shift and change how we respond to people, but also that empowers us into the mode of creation. Bless you. Which is ultimately what love is. Love is creation. And for me, that was kind of the whole process of this, is, you know, shifting those structures and leveraging those things that are already in place. Like, yes, the triggers are going to be there. Yes, the reactivity is going to be there. Yes, the response. All those things are going to be there. But also the love is always going to be there. So it's like, if we can ultimately see that love and place it, even just by asking a question right there, like, oh, this person just said, oh, like, they didn't really need to say that, but what am I trying to learn right now? Just simply even asking that, and then being like, oh, okay, like, this is how I can show up. You know, you almost invite that creation of love in you, and rather than just seeing a reactive path and a responsive path, you can see that balance in the middle of, like, what am I going to create right here? And allow God, or source, or universe, or Krishna, or whoever you believe in, to just come through you and create.
Yeah.
And that right there is you being love.
And that's so beautiful, because that kind of reminds me of should get you.
She can't roll over, her butt too big.
Something I watched this Esther Perel interview, and she kind of talks about how like you can also change the reaction of the person in front of you by how you choose to see them, or how you choose to interpret their behavior and their reaction. So it's like, it's so like, so like someone's doing something that's annoying you, and then you're like, oh, it's so annoying, but then actually you can change how you then respond. If you maybe understand where they're coming from, then that kind of changes how they then do what they're doing. And like you said, and I think that's so beautiful, you were kind of like, this is very much like, like really helpful in the relational space to diffuse like tension, conflict, is to be curious, because we have a sense of like why somebody's doing something. They don't care, or or they're just being annoying, they know I hate that, or whatever the narrative might be. And then actually when you show curiosity behind that, maybe you find out there's something else underneath there. There's actually something else going on, something else that's motivating that behavior. And actually if you can shine some compassion and curiosity there, and give someone space to like share what's actually going on, then it actually can bring more understanding, more closeness, less conflict. So you're right. I mean, and then that is definitely like that place of reaction and response. Like that is where you get a real chance to be responsive, as opposed to reactionary, or like, oh, that annoys me, so I'm going to do this. It's like, oh, okay, what's happening here? Show some curiosity for yourself as well, like you said, like, what am I doing to contribute to this, or like in taking your own responsibility, and then also showing curiosity. And then that's beautiful. And then, like you say, trying to bring more harmony into the relational space.
Absolutely. Yeah, what was just coming in as you were saying that is like, this was like just purity that just came in. I was like, just that analogy I said with love, right? Love is just creation, but I feel like we are love, so we have only the ability to create. But I think when those structures and those stones are kind of in place, kind of just like creating a dam into creating something new and pushing you into that reactivity, we end up creating these thoughts of like why this person is doing that, like, oh, this person's being annoying because of this, and you create bless you, you create this narrative, or you create this plot, or you create this frame of like expectations, and we're literally creating, but we're using the love to create that, instead of like you taking that love and like creating something, but having a clear mind and a clear heart and a clear body, and be like, oh, let me create this. Use your imagination, exercise these higher faculties. And I think bringing that sense of like wholeness to it can ultimately bring us to that embodiment of it, and somatically feeling it, obviously, and then also cognitively having that clarity. And like how you were just saying, like this council of people. Now I'm like, oh damn, now they're all back there like, I think we need to be a council. I'm like, motherfucker, no, y'all better sit down in the dorm like y'all been. But no, I just feel like a lot of this, especially that you shared, like just being in the body and understanding like that sense of that feeling, it's like it's also given me an empowerment to kind of look at the emotional response in that way, and like another way to actually express it and like receive it. So I want to thank you for that.
No, thank you, man.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in as well. We will be sharing a lot more of this, and this balance between the masculine and feminine, and ultimately breaking down, distilling, and dissolving a little bit further and a little bit further, so that we can kind of understand like where we are being actually led from, giving you guys practical reasons, and also just relating to these real life concepts that are actually going on in your daily life, and ways that we can navigate them and also come out of them ultimately empowered, embodied, and whole. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
If you like this episode, please support the podcast and the channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, or donating. You will also find all of the show notes and questions in the description, along with important links and contact details. We look forward to seeing you next time here with us on this MF Quadrant.